Okay. Good afternoon, Reverend Alison van Dijk. It is an incredible pleasure to be able to have this opportunity to discuss your wisdom, your leadership experience, your dreams and aspirations as a woman of faith who's also a leader of a distinct and unique and the first ever women-led interfaith global organization our world has known. And so many other things beside, which I hope that this interview will give us a chance for you to share and elaborate. Lead Integrity is really it's a platform. It's a global management consultancy, the first to be founded by and led by women only. But being led by women does not mean that we're focused only on women, that we work only for women. It is led by women, and we have partners, very strong partners and advisors from different walks of life, from different parts of the world, representing different faiths and professions who are men and women as well. So that's the idea, is to showcase faith-inspired leadership. And leadership that is understood to be a leadership built through and on service to the common good. So that's at the heart of what Lead Integrity is meant to be, and hopefully will enable. We evolved together a series of conversations on leadership. So we believe, coming from different faith traditions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, and others, that the word has a very, very powerful impact and is understood powerfully in different ways by different nations, customs, traditions, and cultures. So the series we've evolved, in which we're delighted to be able to host you in, is on the spoken word. Your words, your wisdom, your leadership. And we also have a series on the visual word, which looks at documentaries and films. And then there is the written word, which is probably the least of the work we've done so far, simply because the wealth of knowledge and material already out there is there. And because we believe that the conversation brings out the best in any engagement of humans. So this is, in a nutshell, the purpose. And we just wanted to give you the chance to learn from you. Who is Reverend Alison van Dijk? How would you like to share with us the story of how you came to be where you are now as the executive director of the Temple of Understanding, and many other things beside? We acknowledge, I know that you're doing so much else. How did you come to be here? And what is your story that you'd care to share?
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to be interviewed. The first thing I want to say is that I'm not a reverend. That's okay. But I think it's very important.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
No, but it's important because so much of my story is not leading by having been taught to be a leader. So I have not studied formally religions of any kind. I have done a lot of informal understanding of different religions by going to different religious sites and learning from the people themselves. And that's exactly what Juliet did as well. So Juliet was also not a reverend. So I think one of the things about my particular experience with the Temple of Understanding and Juliet Hollister is that I always felt that there was a karmic connection between the two of us, that I am the same age as her daughters, so I'm a generation younger than she was. My mother and my aunt were very close friends of hers. They all grew up together in Southport, Connecticut. My aunt went to school with her, went to high school with her. And so the family connection was very powerful. And when my father passed away when I was 6, and my mother remarried and moved to Greenwich, Connecticut, where Juliet lived, my mother went to visit her, of course, and she took me with her. And to me, Juliet was like a kind of Auntie Mame character. You know, she was just fun, and she had so many wonderful stories, and she did so many incredible things, and all these people that she knew, these different religious traditions. And I mean, she was magic to my then 15-year-old mind.
And just to
And
clarify, please, that we're talking about Juliet Hollister, who's the founder of the Temple of Understanding, which you have been leading now for many years.
yes,
Okay.
sorry.
No, no, it's good
Yeah.
that because I know, but I just thought maybe others don't. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm jumping in feet first. So the connection to me was a very deep one. And when I was 15, my mother took me to tea at Juliet's, and that was literally the month that she had this incredible sort of revelation that the religious teachers of the world needed to come together to solve the problems of the world. And so she explained all this to my mother and to myself. My mother was sort of poo-pooing the idea, and I was just fascinated. And I got it. I really, really knew what it was she was talking about. And that's what I mean by a kind of a karmic connection. It wasn't just a story to me. It was like her story and something about my soul
Hmm.
journey connected in that moment. And I look back at that and say, that really was the inception of where she started the Temple of Understanding and where I followed the Temple of Understanding through Juliet. Now, I was also young, and I wanted to live my own life, and I didn't want somebody to tell me what to do. And so when I left college, my husband and I went to Vermont, and I became a dairy farmer. So I was a dairy farmer in Vermont for 10 years. And, you know, I sort of talked with Juliet, and the temple was doing whatever. And I would say, oh, how nice, or you know, that's great. But I didn't really participate in the early years too much. When they had some big events, like I think there was one at Columbia and there was one in upstate New York. I mean, when they had, like, particularly at schools and things like that, I followed that because when I was at Sarah Lawrence, I had hosted her to come and talk at Sarah Lawrence. So I was kind of in and out, you might say, but not in any way thinking that I would ever take this on. My husband and I went back to school in California. I became a child psychotherapist. We moved back east after 4 years, and I started a private practice, and I started working in a preschool and developed a preschool program for 4-year-olds, which I did for 20 years, and which was what I thought was my true profession. That was really where I was coming from as far as what I wanted to do with my life. And I loved it. I felt really in tune with that whole thing. I made 2 films about the work that I did with preschool children.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm still working on a possible book to sort of talk more about the work that I studied, which was the Dr. Margaret Lowenfeld method of sand play. So I
Okay.
spent a lot of time, you know, hosting people talking about sand play, and we brought people to the East Coast from the West Coast and people from London, where Dr. Lowenfeld started her work. And I was very involved in all that. So after a while, I moved on from that, and I was in Greenwich at the same time, and Juliet was talking about, oh, she was getting older and whatnot. Well, she decided that she would pass the organization on to Jim Morton, Reverend James Parks Morton. And that was a wonderful time of the Temple of Understanding, and it lasted as long as it could, really, with him. But at a certain point, there was a kind of a break. Let's say he went his way and he had an idea about what he wanted to do. That I felt strongly, and here's where this karmic connection comes in. I felt very strongly that that was not the direction that the Temple of Understanding should go in. And very simply, he wanted to work with New York City and interfaith projects in New York City. I thought that we were an international interfaith organization, and I didn't want to lose our UN connection or that whole international feeling that we had, and the work that we had done internationally. So we had a major showdown at a board meeting, and basically by one vote, I maintained control of the organization at that point. We had a different president. Eventually he said, you know what? You really need to take this on. This is really your organization. I said, uh-oh, I think it probably is. And so I started my third profession as the head of the Temple of Understanding.
Roughly when was that, Allison? Year?
In about 2002 is when I started being the leader. So, I had not been trained to do any of this kind of work. I was working one-on-one with children and with their families, and a little bit with group work as well. All of that stood me in good stead, because actually it turns out that being able to be a therapist and understand what people's motives are and what it is we need to do to create this organization and to strengthen it.
Mm,
I had some background that was helpful for all of those things,
mm,
but I also had to learn a lot by the seat of my pants.
mm,
And when I came into the organization, there were lots of problems. I
mm,
won't go into them all, but I mean, it was no easy job taking this on.
mm,
There were financial problems, there were personnel problems, there were all kinds of problems. And the president said to me, look, Juliet's passed away. A lot of these people are in this organization because of her. You're going to have to get your own team together. So
mm.
what we're going to do is we're going to ask everybody to resign, and then we're going to ask anybody that wants to join you to join up.
Okay.
So you can imagine what a, kind of situation that was. It was pretty rough,
Right. Right. Ooh, mm,
but we survived, and I kept building and building. And um, I took on, I kept the work at the UN. I thought that was really critically important. I increased work with young people.
mhm,
We started programs for youth. I started that. We had some youth at the UN. We did some UN projects, and I soon brought on Sister Joan Kirby
mhm,
to
mhm,
be the executive director, and I kind of stayed in the background for a while. And then she and I had a tete-a-tete, and she said, I really want to be the UN representative. And I said, well, that's good, because I think, it's time for me to take on your role and you to take on the UN role. So
okay.
we basically divided the organization up that way. We had a youth program, we had the UN program, and then I did the Hollister Awards and all kinds of other programming. So I was basically running one section, you might say, of the whole organization. So
Can I ask
one of
a
the
question?
yeah,
Sorry for interrupting, but I just
sure.
noticed that you mentioned something, you mentioned it in passing, and I think it's actually potentially very important and interesting, given that the audience for these conversations tends to come from all over the world. And the specific point you mentioned is that you felt that the international or the global outreach and engagement was very important, and hence you also ensured that there would be a UN liaison function and so on. Can you can you please help us understand where and why you got that impression that the global or the international aspect mattered so much?
Sure. The back Going back to the days of Juliet and Eleanor Roosevelt's connection. Eleanor Roosevelt looked at the Temple of Understanding, and she understood that we had a role to play at the United Nations, bringing, let's just say, the moral view
Mm-hmm,
of
mm-hmm,
religions to the secular setting of the United Nations.
mm-hmm,
And so she really encouraged Juliet to work on that and to keep that flame alive at the
mm-hmm,
UN.
mm-hmm,
We all recognize how hard that is, because the secular environment was a difficult environment to be in. And we had events at the UN where we basically were almost thrown out because we were so many religions, but just the idea of religion just
wow.
upset them greatly. And
Mm,
it took years to break that down. And I have to credit Sister Joan Kirby with her determination to break that down.
mm, mm,
She did. And I think it's because the vision that Juliet had was that the world needed people to come together and understand each other. We needed the diversity, we needed the pluralism, we needed people to look at other human beings and say how wonderful they are, how beautiful the human race is. And that hadn't been happening, let's just say. And unfortunately, Juliet did a great job in opening that up. And I felt that that was the heart of what we had to give as an interfaith organization to a secular setting like United Nations. And I think that, to me, I mean, I hate to sound like, I'm in tune with something up there, but I really felt that that was our vision. I felt that we were holding that flame for the world, and it's an interfaith flame. So it's not just our flame, but I think that's the vision and the purpose of the interfaith work, is to hold that moral vision, to guide the world in a very deep moral sense, that we have to love each other, we have to accept each other, we can dialogue with each other,
Mhm.
as long as we dialogue in peace. We need to accept differences and acknowledge the beauty of the human race. And if we do not do that, our entire world is in jeopardy, as it is, in a sense, always in jeopardy without that. So when you look at these secular missions working with each other, if they can't respect each other, if they can't have, that openness to try to find the moral ground of what it is they need to be doing, then we're sunk. If everything goes in the other direction, we're just sunk. So the the kind of sense that I had that Juliet had given me was something that's very deep and very difficult to talk about, because I think I sound a little bit like, I'm a little bit crazy, but I felt like I had been handed a vision, not just a job, but a real serious vision. And I think that's why, in spite of all of my fears and trepidation about taking on the Temple of Understanding, because I mean, to me, I was looking at these incredible figures that had gone before me, saying, how can somebody like me carry this forward? I don't have all these credentials. I'm not a minister. I'm not, I don't run the cathedral as like John the Divine. You know, how am I supposed to follow in these footsteps here? So, but the one thing that has always kept me grounded is the sense that this is basically my path. This is something that I came into this life to do. And I'm not, I mean, I make mistakes, I'm not perfect, but it's why I have stayed for 20 years or 21 years doing it, even though I'm heading on in years. I'm 79 years old. And I keep saying, well, by the time I'm 80, everybody, I think it's time for the next generation to come in here. And I do feel it's time for the next generation. But what we have to be sure of is that whoever carries this organization forward, also carries that vision.
Mm.
And it's not an intellectual vision.
Mm-mm.
So the other thing, the other skill that I think I have is that I have a kind of intuitive, creative side.
Mhm.
I love running programs, putting people together. Um, all of our Hollister Awards, I mean, it sounds strange, but every time we would pick a Hollister awardee, the next thing we know, they'd become famous. Like Wangari Maathai, we gave her an award, not thinking anything. And the next thing we know, she's given a Peace Prize. I mean, it was kind of like that all of these awardees would suddenly become totally well known. And, I mean, it was just synchronistic.
Mhm.
Yes. intuitive, I don't know.
Definitely. I would
You know,
think
it was just
so.
a special kind of like pathway, I guess, and inspiration, because I mean, I get a lot of inspiration from what I call my masters and my teachers. And I often pray about, you know, whatever it is I'm trying to put together. And if things get rough, I say more prayers than usual, but I really do try to, you know, go into that spiritual place where I feel like I'm in tune with the masters and the teachers who are bringing the light to this world and who are very aware of the darkness that we are facing and are helping us bring light into this consciousness that we need to be raising here. So um, I don't know what else you might want to
I'm
know about me. Why don't you
curious.
ask me another question?
Sure, I'd love to. I've got so many. I'm actually trying to go easy here because you've opened up so many different avenues for investigation, interrogation, wanting to know more, curiosity, and so on. Um, I just want to pay tribute to before you rush on to speak more. I think it's important to pause for a second and appreciate what you've managed to do with this vision that was handed to you and which your heart opened up to accept so willingly, and you needed to fight for and struggle a little bit with others for. And that mission of this moral vision for our world, the commitment to the United Nations as a space, as a site for the for carrying out this mission. I think I just want to take a moment to pause and say, as someone who has had the, I think, immense blessing of sort of walking alongside from a distance, to observe the temple over the years since I first came to New York in 2000. Just first thing I heard about, even though I was working at that time for Religions for Peace, it was the temple was the first thing that I heard about, being interested in the intersection of women, faith, and diplomacy since then, and human rights. The temple was the obvious known space and site. And at that time, Sister Joan Kirby was indeed the UN person with a lot of engagement and work and so on. And so I just want to take a moment to pause and say, show immense gratitude to you, Alison, for that stewardship that you provided and continue to provide. And the reason I'm doing that is part of the reason for the next question.
Mm-hmm.
The work of interfaith, international interfaith today, is predominantly dominated by men. It is men who lead international interfaith organizations. Since the time of Juliet Hollister's shared vision with Eleanor Roosevelt and the founding of the Temple of Understanding. At that time, there was hardly anyone doing interfaith, with the exception of the Parliament of World Religions, which at that time had a very specific sort of convening of everyone role and was still led by men and was definitely always in that space. But this vision that women came up with, and that the commitment to, if you will, that the feminine compassion, but also the integrity of leadership of women, moral leadership, I think is so unique to the temple. Since then, the world of international interfaith has become so populated. There's an international interfaith initiative, organization, course, effort in almost everywhere you look. And I'm curious about how you've lived these times of transition, how you see the interfaith world around you today, internationally and in the United States, obviously. But how do you see it? Because yours is a unique perspective. Yours is almost the same as I assume Juliet's would have been had she been walking alongside you. You would have observed this, and with the karmic connection, how do you see what's going on around us now? In terms of interfaith, how is that, how does that complement or contradict or further the vision that you so determinedly have from the temple's perspective?
Well, first of all, it's important to realize that the Temple of Understanding that Juliet started was in 1960. There were no other interfaith organizations in North America. So she had a period of time before the Parliament of the World restarted, because the Parliament was not alive and well until about 1993, I believe, because they invited us to come to the first Parliament. So we came to the first Parliament, and Juliet's attitude towards all of these big organizations today that started was basically, oh, this is so great. We can't do all this work by ourselves. And, she felt that she was seeding these other organizations. Her whole idea was this Johnny Appleseed, Mary Juliet Appleseed, going around seeding interfaith organizations. And I had a wonderful interview with Reverend Bill Swing. And he at the end of this talk, he said, well, you haven't asked me the most important question. And I said, oh, what's that? I was like, whoop, what did I do? And he said, you haven't asked me about my relationship with Juliet Allister. I loved Juliet Allister. She was the only person when I started my organization who called me up and said, congratulations, this is wonderful. I'm so happy you're doing this.
And
He
this is
said,
now to clarify, this is Bishop Williams
Bishop Swing,
Swing, who is the founder of the United Religions Initiative. You are
URI started. And
right.
of course, we came to the first URI gathering because Juliet was just so excited that, these other organizations were starting up. So I think that if you get that excitement that she thought she was helping to bring this whole interfaith idea into an actual field, that all these different organizations were starting, she felt the more the merrier. And I still feel that way. The other thing that is really, I think, critical for women's leadership, and certainly we've had to think about that a lot. Why are we different? What is it that makes women's leadership a different energy force? What I saw in Juliet was this drive to cooperate with others, to collaborate with others, to work as colleagues with others. I never saw Juliet trying to be competitive with anyone. I mean, I've tried. I am a little more competitive by nature, probably because I played a lot of sports, so I was pretty competitive as a sport person, tennis and skiing and you name it. But I really understood that element that women don't need to compete. Women do better when they work together.
Yes.
And as a woman running an interfaith organization, I had a lot of men, sort of say, well, I could take over your organization for you, and you're doing a good job, dear, but I had lots of that. And I always thought, but what do they think I'm doing here? It just sort of made me, laugh at how many times they thought they could do a better job. And I thought, there are plenty of men out there doing interfaith work. We don't really need another male running an interfaith organization. And it's not, I have nothing against men. We have men on our board. I love men. We work with men all the time. It's but again, when we work with men, we work cooperatively with men. We work on an equal basis because we're coming from an equal place. So I think as far as energetically, if women could keep that idea in mind, that we work together best when we work cooperatively with each other, I think that we would go a long way to do a better job with handling the problems of this world.
Including
I think men just are not doing a good job with it on the level of too much competitive and one-upmanship and all kinds of nonsense that's unnecessary.
I think
Yeah,
that
go ahead.
no, I think you just mentioned another really, really, really good nugget of wisdom. I mean, everything you've said, this is particularly valuable because in so many of the interviews that we're having in Lead Integrity with different women leaders, the issue of women on women collaboration versus competition does come out. And often it's sort of awkwardly put because yes, of course, we're all committed to collaborating with one another, and we believe that if we work together we can do so much more and better for our world. But at the same time, almost every interview, the issue of, well, it's not always been an easy relationship between women and women. And I just wanted your take on that, because so far you've described how incredibly collaborative that relationship in your life has been, from Juliet to yourself, Sister Joan Kirby, etc. And I'm just curious, like, here we are, let's assume that there's a number of young people listening to this, and we'll get soon to the other incredible flagship that Temple of Understanding has been systematic in upholding and serving, which is youth leadership and empowerment and so on. We'll get to there in a second, but what would be the advice you would want to share with younger men, and especially women, on the women on woman journey of leadership and some of the issues that do come up, don't always get openly talked about because the secular feminist movement doesn't wish to engage with this particular dynamic of maybe we're not each other's best friends all the time. So what would be the advice that your own learning and wisdom through so many different stages of service to children, to communities, to interfaith and interreligious groups and so on, what would be your advice to the younger women today?
I think that if a younger woman can sort of look at their own strength and have the courage to say, I am important. My wisdom is my truth, and I'm able to speak my truth in spite of what anybody tells me. I think just the courage to do that is what women need. And I don't mean that men try to put women down, but I think men have this attitude of superiority that can be very damaging to a woman's self-esteem. And in my life, I've certainly had to struggle with having my self-esteem challenged by men. And what I've basically learned is that it's tough, but you have to keep saying to yourself, no, I know what I'm talking about. I really do. I really am able to do this job. And what I have to say is important. And if it isn't, fine, then I will, work with it in a different way. But because I can be open, I can change, I can be fluid, and I can also take criticism happy to hear what somebody doesn't think is working well. But it's not competitive. It's a feeling of a sister will tell you what she really thinks of you. I don't have sisters, but a sister would tell you what she really thinks of you. A brother might be a little different. So go to your sisters and listen to them and let them help you fine tune your own truth, and do the same for them. And it's in that strength that I feel women will come into being able to be more collaborative. I mean, I feel sorry when I come up against another woman who is has to be competitive. I don't feel it's a strength. I feel it's a weakness, and I feel it's from some trauma or damage in their past that happens. So I know it's not a healthy thing. And so that's why I say strengthen your inner knowing, strengthen yourself, strengthen your ego, because and I don't mean be egoistic. I just mean be able to stand up for your truth
Mm.
in spite of what someone else might want to throw at you. You have to just take those punches and say, I'm not going there. I know what I'm doing. I'm going to do what I'm doing. I know it's going well. So what's the problem? It's that kind of thing.
Thank you. I wondered, because of the those of us who've had the privilege of hearing and learning and serving alongside the Temple of Understanding, are familiar with some of the work on youth. I think it's been singular, the way that the Temple of Understanding works with and in a sense helps to focus the spotlight on enabling the youth to be their best. I think it's singular compared to any other space that I am familiar with. And so I'd like you to please tell us a little bit about that work on and with youth, what it is like, what motivates it, what is your own reflection after so many years of crafting that space and enabling it. How do you feel about it? How do you see this?
I think it has a lot to do with the relationship that Sister Joan and I had with each other. We were both educators. We both worked in schools. We both worked with children. We both had a sense that we had to be working with the next generation in order to be doing what the Temple of Understanding should be doing, which is mentoring young people. So we both had that drive.
Mm.
And one of the first things that I did when I took over running the organization was started talking with Joan about, what are we going to do about young people? And we hired someone to run youth programs right away.
Mm.
So I think by 2003, we had our first youth program up and running. And then Sister Joan had her own youth program that she put together that was focused just on the United Nations.
Mm.
And and that she was bringing the young people from the school where she was a principal for 9 some years, Sacred Heart
Mm.
School. She was bringing those young women in to learn about the United Nations right away. So we had this immediate understanding with each other that this was just. I mean, I always think that we have like three prongs of what we do, and the third prong was the one that was not happening when Jim Morton was running the organization. It was something Juliet wanted to get off the ground, and did to some extent. I mean, they did have some youth programs in the beginning. In fact, I started with the Temple of Understanding as their youth representative.
Mm.
So it wasn't that they weren't trying. They were, but they were too spread out, and they were sort of going to these schools and trying to think it would all happen outside of the organization. We brought it to the organization, and we developed it within our organization. So we had a chance to develop the curriculum. We had a chance to develop who was going to be leading them. We had a chance to decide who would take the program. They do these big, they have to fill out all sorts of forms, and we really are looking for young people interested in the world of um, the the interfaith work and international relations work, and thinking that these are young people that are going to either go into the UN proper, or they're going to do work that's related, UN related, or they're going to do work whatever in their own country that um, upholds and supports women, or supports youth, or supports diversity, or however they look at it. And the young men are the same. I mean, the young men really they really get a good sense of that dynamic. So I think it was, I mean, it was just meant to be. It was just, Joan and I were just like two peas in a pod when it came to that whole vision. We just, I still love children. I love being around children. I remember so well my years of working with children. And Joan was the same. And this was her vision as well. So I think it just fell into place. The minute the two of us were running the show, we were like, oh, well, where are the kids?
So, what exactly would you say the Temple of Understanding does with and for youth?
So look, I mean, over the years, we did a lot of different things. Okay. But always we worked with young people to expand the horizon, to help them see that they could go to college, they could do anything they wanted, to give them a support system. Because a lot of times schools would just be plunking information into their heads, but never really giving them the feeling that they could be who they wanted to be or do what they wanted to do. And so we were really expanding their horizons, not only in terms of their personal horizon, but also like the world. Bringing them to the UN is exposure to the world's issue, the world's problems. I remember this one young man who I guess had to come in on a train, and he would be reading the newspaper, and then he'd come to the UN, and the same issue that he'd read in the paper was being discussed at the meeting he was at, and he would be like, "This is amazing," you know. So it was that immediacy, that kind of like, um, no, I mean, it's not something you can. These are not things you can read about. These are not classes where you can just pick up a book and say, this is Model UN or something like that. This was really on the grounds, getting the image, seeing the people, talking to people, and having those people listen to them. That was a big one too. That
Mm.
was a big. We had some pretty wild successes on that level. We had a young woman from Mongolia who was able to speak at the high level political forum. Because her mission was up for discussing what they were doing about the development goals, and she raised her hand and started saying, "Well, I'm studying this program, and it's all about pollution, and there's so much pollution in my country." And and the representative was like, "Oh, well, you're right, and okay," and he was totally taken aback. But that's the young voice. The young voice is concerned about the environment, concerned about the world they're going to inherit, and they need to have a voice. So we provide that basically. We train them, we teach them, we support them in what they want to do, and we help them find their passion. And that to me is education.
Absolutely. Very well said, Alison. Thank you. Um, Two last questions, and I promise I'll let you be. But what can you share a moment in your career which you still think about now and feel grateful for, really, I don't know, comforted by, or that still, makes you get goosebumps? Just any of that sort of the special moment, a special moment in your incredible career. And what was it? And why is it special?
Ah, well, I think I've had many, many special moments.
That's a
And
blessing.
and I think it's because I spent a lot of time with Juliet before I was running the organization. Um, I went to Beijing, for instance, for the women's conference, and I
95.
just had gotten back, and I arrived at something like midnight and crawled into bed, and it was about 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock the next morning, and the phone rang, and I sleepily grabbed the phone. And, it was Juliet, and she said, "Okay, you've got to get dressed right away. I'm picking you up in 10 minutes." And I was like, "Juliet, I just got back from China. I'm completely wiped out. Doesn't matter. We are meeting with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You must get dressed right away."
Mhm.
So, I was like, "All right." Of course, I jumped up, got dressed, and we went, I went in with this limo, and she had these people meeting with His Holiness, and we had this huge meeting and everything. And I know that they had come with some idea, something they wanted to talk to him about.
Mhm.
So Juliet said, "Oh, and this is Alison van Dijk," and she always used to call me her niece. So this is my niece. And she just got back from Beijing. And His Holiness whipped around and looked at me and said, "Beijing, tell me about Beijing." And the rest of the time, all he wanted to do was to hear about the women in Beijing.
Oh,
And I had some great stories for him, because it just so happened that we had given our passes to a lot of women who were Tibetan, and we just told them, "Change your name."
oh,
So
wow.
so we had a whole group of Tibetan women that we were working with, that we had brought there. I mean, they came on their own steam, but I mean, we had supported them in coming. And so I'll just quickly tell you this one story, because
Please.
this is an amazing event. So we knew all the women were there, and we It wasn't like we were, I don't want to put us on a pedestal about all this because we were just one group of many that were doing this for them.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're all in this place called the Peace Tent, which is where we had our events. And all of a sudden we heard all this screaming and yelling and, real, something awful was going on. And we opened our, we all sort of ran out and said, what's happening? What's happening? And these Tibetan women were all running towards the peace tent because they thought the peace tent meant peace. And they were being chased by, let's just say, Chinese, I don't know, police or something. I mean, they were being harassed. Okay, let's say it for what it is. They were being harassed. So we grabbed them. We brought them into the peace tent. We all, without saying a word, we all just created this huge circle around them, and and that the police couldn't get through. And even if they did, they would have been so shamed.
Mm.
Right? That, I mean, we had the women in the center and we had them, peacefully there. And we just were all surrounding them and quietly praying with them. No one said, let's do this. No one.
Happened.
It happened. So, I mean, there have been many, many times in my life where the power of women coming together has been demonstrated. But that really, to me, was like one of the most amazing high points in my entire time with the Temple of Understanding. It was just so powerful to realize
Mm.
that a group of women could stop, like maybe 25 policemen chasing Tibetan women to harass them, not by, any kind of
Premeditated act of
anything,
violence.
just total nonviolent, peaceful, putting our arms around them with a big circle, smiling and saying, you're safe. So it was interesting. It was very interesting.
That's an amazing image. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that story,
Mm.
Alice. Um, my last question actually segues from this because I think we're living in an era where on almost every continent there is an armed conflict, if not many. And yet we are celebrating decades of interfaith dialogue and meetings, and we're still
Mhm.
going, gung-ho with a gazillion and one meetings everywhere in different fora that are, whether it's on the environment or on human rights or on all sorts of things where, religious leaders, institutions, and people of faith are coming together in more and more frequency and a number. And there seems to be a bit of an anomaly. Here's a world increasingly at war with itself. At the same time, the initiatives of interfaith peace building have never been more intense and numerous. So, how do we make sense of that, Alison? How do we make sense, and where do we find the strength to carry on doing interfaith work, given
Mm.
these dynamics?
This is where I just I just feel that we have to go into our religious feelings of faith. That this is where we have to have faith. And and I have a lot of faith on the level of the transformation that we are actually going through. I mean, I don't see it as the world falling apart so much as the transformation that needs to take place. And not, it's the, I think more and more people are rising up against violence,
Mm.
are rising up against violent actions, violent words, against nastiness and bigotry and corruption. I mean, I just think more and more people, good people, and maybe people that have even not been good, but sort of wake up
Mm.
and say, I don't want to be like this anymore. I see, I think we have to take the long view.
Mm.
Okay. We're in the worst part of it right now.
Mm.
And it looks really pretty bad. But it's not the end by any means. We're right at the point where the whole transition is possible.
Mhm.
And we are carrying the vision for that transformation. That's what the interfaith work is all about. We must carry that vision. And we can only carry it if we have faith that we can carry it.
Mm, mm.
If we give in to allowing the negativity to take over, then we've lost our faith. We've lost our way. We've lost the vision of bringing the light into the darkness. So to me, the light will always shine in the darkness. And we just have to remember that and just not give up, not be too discouraged, not look at it from what's happening here now, but look at it from where we are moving, where we are evolving. We're evolving into this tremendous light-filled world that will be. We need to keep that faith that it will be.
Thank you. That was beautifully put and very well said. And thank you for giving me the inspiration, because that question was not a hypothetical one, but something very much based on where I sit and look around and try to find
Oh yeah, I
inspiration.
know.
Very
It's
great.
very hard. I mean, this is a very hard time. Very, very painful time.
Yeah.
But I think if we can just rise, and I don't mean ignore it, I just mean if we can bring our consciousness up into the place where we can see through it,
Mm.
then I do believe that we will hold the faith. And if we all hold the faith, we will make the transition. It may not be in my lifetime, it may not be in your lifetime, but it will happen.
Yes, as we say in my tradition, inshallah, it will happen, God willing. Dio volente. Thank you, Alison van Dijk. Thank you very much indeed. This was enriching on so many levels, and very, very, very much close to one's heart. Is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with, something for them to mull over? I mean, you've given us plenty, but are there any
Mhm.
final words you want to share, or thoughts, or anything at all?
Well, I think what I said about holding the vision, that is really the most important thing. But on an interpersonal level, I really also feel that working together and honoring others and looking at the next generation to mentor them and to bring them up into the beauty of what they can be, of who they can be. I think if we concentrate on those elements, we will see this transition take place. But we have to do our work. We have to do our own work.
And we have to be together. We have to do this together. It's not
We
something that
have to do this
one
together. It's not a solo journey.
group nation can do on its own.
No, no.
Thank you so much, Alison van Dijk. Thank you so very, very much for this
Thank you, Asa. It's
enriching
been a pleasure.